CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor with Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. There's a cargo plane in Buenos Aires airport right now. On board that cargo plane were mysteries. The mysteries are now certainly not solved. Some of the mysteries were Iranian nationals. Some of the mysteries were the equipment on board, and some of the mysteries was the plane itself. Malcolm Hoenlein and I welcome Joseph Umar, the Executive Director of Secure Free Society. There's so many dots on the map. We're going to concentrate on the Iranian part because the captain of the cargo plane that had come from Mexico City at some point had also visited in previous days, we believe, other parts of South America. The captain is a senior official in the IRGC named Ghasemi. Joseph, a very good evening to you. What's an IRGC boss doing on board a cargo plane claiming that he's the pilot and that he's training Venezuelans how to fly? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Good evening, Malcolm. Well, that's the question, right? The question is, what is a IRGC individual, not just flying a Venezuelan plane, but also coming to a country that Iran has bombed on multiple occasions and that has opened investigations against Iranian officials because of these terrorist attacks that happened in the 90s. And it's had, you know, John, as well as Malcolm, a long history of just nefarious actions and just mysterious developments, including the assassination of a prosecutor. So this is the big question. And what I can tell you, John, is that this is primarily a case of arms proliferation and sanctions violations. Both the plane and the passengers, at least some of the passengers, the Iranian ones particularly, are under U.S. sanctions, meaning that they belong to the IRGC. The IRGC is a sanctioned entity. The Conviasa, the national airline of Venezuela, is a sanctioned airline. Mahan Air, who seems to be the actual owner of that plane, the Iranian airline, is also a sanctioned entity. So this is definitely a sanctions violation, and which is one of the reasons why the plane can't leave Argentina. The second part of this, John, is this has everything to do with the covert military programs that Iran has with Venezuela. This talks about combat drones. This talks about short-range ballistic missiles. These are all things that are a reality right now inside the Maduro regime's military. And there's no coincidence that Gholam Reza Ghasemi, the IRGC pilot, so to speak, is known as a weapons trafficker. That's what he did when he was piloting Mahan Air back in the day. So this is, I think, what the crux of the case.
What's happened in the last 24 hours is that significant members of Congress have written a letter to the Biden administration asking for this investigation to go forward. Malcolm?
Yes, they did write a letter, and I think, but I want to go to something that has sort of emerged out of the findings of a Mossad investigation, other investigations of the original Amia bombings and the president's plane, saying that it was Hezbollah, but not Iran, even though Iran funds Hezbollah, controls Hezbollah. Well, what is the distinction that is made when you're talking about actions in Argentina, whether it's Hezbollah or Iran directly, when Iran is behind everything they do?
Yeah, John, I saw the New York Times article, Malcolm, and honestly, I talked to a lot of people both in Israel and in Argentina. And actually, there was an article that just came out last night from Argentina that basically says that the New York Times misreported this. They got access to the original intelligence report from the Mossad. And what it basically says is that Iran, it says what we know. Iran supported Hezbollah. Hezbollah carried out the activities. There was no local Argentines involved in the 92 bombing on the embassy. But they didn't mention that about the Amia, which happened 2 years later in 94. And so what basically with the clarification that I got was that it was misreported by the New York Times. They left out key details of that report. And what I know personally, investigating this situation for a long time and having read the confidential classified intelligence reports from Argentina, Iran was definitely behind the Amia bombing in 1994. They have 1,500 pages of documentation behind that I hope they declassify in Argentina, because it would prove that without a shadow of a doubt.
And to get to John's question about the 12 senators who are truly frustrated at this point, I heard Joni Ernst this morning talking about it, others. What would be the reason why the Justice Department won't provide the information to assist in the investigation of the plane?
So I don't know. So this is the question because apparently there was a request made by Argentina to get support, technical support, and we have a legal agreement with Argentina to provide us support to investigate this case. It's a very complex case. It could be a case of dual-use weapons proliferation. That's a very hard thing to investigate. And so there's the cargo that should be in question. There's obviously the flight crew that's in question, and there's the plane itself. Now, my understanding is the cargo has been released by the judge in Argentina, so that might end up leaving Argentina soon. I hope the flight crew doesn't get released as well, but I'm told that might happen in short order. But then there's still the question of the plane. And I think at the minimum, the U.S. has some jurisdictions to be able to seize the plane. Not to mention there was a U.S. company that was involved in the commercial cover to be able to have this transport come to Argentina as a company based in Miami. So I think the United States has some jurisdictions. They obviously have some knowledge that they can impart upon the Argentine authorities. And I think time is of the essence because this is slipping out of the hands of the Argentines and the rest.
To your knowledge, Joseph, are all of the passengers who arrived still in Argentina? And as I understand, there's a question about whether there were 5 Iranians on board or 6. What do we know about the crew, the people who arrived with the plane?
Okay, so from what I understand, all the passengers, the 19 passengers, 5 Iranians and 14 Venezuelans are still in Argentina. Their passports were taken from them because they were being investigated along with the whole incident. But there was a lot of confusion when this initially started because the first migration list that was, and it wasn't public, but I looked at it, a few other people looked at it, said that there were 6 Iranian passengers on the plane when it arrived in Argentina on June 8th. However, when the plane returned, remember it was leaving Argentina, it had to return because Uruguay closed its airspace. When it returned, and then they had the official migration, that did become public because it got leaked to the press, only showed the names of 5 Iranians on the plane. So there was this mysterious 6th passenger that no one knows about. There was a lot of confusion at first. What they ended up saying was that individual ended up coming, he was on the plane when it went from Mexico to Venezuela, but he didn't go on the plane when it went from Venezuela to Argentina. The truth is we don't know because I saw an entry record in Argentina of that individual coming into the country on June 8th. So we really don't know what happened. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding this plane.
Malcolm?
Is there a contradiction? We saw Maduro welcoming the Argentinian ambassador, restored relationships, diplomatic relationships. Why would Argentina want to alienate or risk alienating Hezbollah, angering Hezbollah, alienating Iran, having troubles with Maduro by seizing the plane?
That's a good question. So I don't think this is a whole of government approach that we're seeing inside Argentina. I think what we're seeing is certain institutions within Argentina that are still maintaining their national security responsibilities. And I'm talking specifically about the federal police, who has worked hand in glove with the FBI for many years in many cases involving organized crime and international terrorism. But I don't think this is at the highest levels of the Argentine government where the president, the ministers are all on board on this. In fact, I think this was a target of opportunity. And I've said this before with John, I think this was opened up an opportunity for not just Argentina, but the rest of Latin America to understand what Iran's been doing, because they've been flying these planes all throughout the pandemic. This is not the only plane, the Venezuelan plane that's piloted by Iranians. We know of several others. But this opened opportunity to understand this a little bit better and to investigate it and creating legal cases. But that opportunity is slipping out of their hands because now the political people got a hold of it.
And the question about where the plane has been prior to being grounded in Buenos Aires, is there any information on that? Where there was talk of the black box might have information, or there was talk of investigating where it was before Mexico City. I know, Joseph, because there was mention that this same plane might have been in Paraguay in the tri-border region several days after the murder of Petschid. Is that lead being followed, where it's been?
No, so this specific plane, yes, it was in Paraguay. It was in Ciudad de Este a few days after the murder of Marcelo Pecci in Colombia. It had been to Paraguay on other occasions. It had been as far afield as Belarus. It had been in, obviously in Venezuela and Mexico. I don't have the actual listen, but according to Flight Radar, there's a bunch of other places this plane has been. But here's the kicker, John. There's actually, that we know about, that my center knows about, 6 planes that are piloted or owned or operated by Iran that are Venezuelan flag carriers that are traveling all throughout Latin America. Those other planes have been to many places like Peru, Chile, Dominican Republic, Suriname, and Mexico. And so that's why I said there's all these planes flying all over Latin America and nobody really knows what they're doing.
Malcolm, we have time for a minute. Question.
Just tell us, what hope is there? We see now even Panama going to the left. We lost virtually every government from Chile to Costa Rica. Is there any hope for recovering in South America?
There is hope, John. It's going to look bad. I'm sorry, Malcolm. It's going to look bad in the next near future. I'm not very optimistic about Brazil. Obviously, I think we've lost Colombia as well. But the Argentina, ironically, I think is where there's hope. There's going to be elections there next year. And what this incident with the plane is showing us is that the current government doesn't have complete control over everything that goes on. There's institutional strength of people that want to carry out their responsibilities, especially on national security. And there's an opposition that's uniting to be able to make sure that the country doesn't collapse like Venezuela and others in the region.
I'm going to make a leap here in time. 1992, the bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. 1994, the mass murder of Jewish Argentinian citizens at a community center in Buenos Aires. The investigation leading to Alberto Nisman saying the night before the night he was murdered, that the next day he was going to introduce evidence of that bombing in 1994, all long linked to bad actors from Iran. And now the twist. The present Vice President Kirchner was president at the time, and subsequent to Nisman's murder, said he committed suicide and other fantastic explanations of a man who'd been murdered. There's never been a solution. Does all this circle around Kirchner's strength in Buenos Aires? How does that connect?
John, I think you're connecting the dots into something that needs to be very well investigated and elaborated inside Argentina. Was the fact that this plane arrived inside Argentina, and it wasn't the first time, but the fact that this plane arrived inside Argentina with a pilot that is a known weapons trafficker for the Quds Force of the IRGC. We're talking about Gholam Reza Ghassemi, and a country that's been bombed on 2 occasions by Iran and, what is with the IRGC. That is a huge cause for concern for Argentine's national security and for entire regional security, because these planes are moving all over the place. Now, which was very telling was immediately after the plane was detained, we're talking about June 8th, 9th, and 10th, the narrative that the certain sections of the Argentine government were trying to promote was very similar to how they were disinforming after the Nisman murder. They were trying to put narratives that weren't true, and they were trying to deceive the Argentine public and the international community. How? In this case, they were saying that Gholam Reza Ghassemi was a homonym. It was basically the name was confused with another individual. It's not the IRGC guy that's a known weapons trafficker. It's somebody else that has a similar name or same name. That turned out to be corrected by both the FBI, the Paraguayan government, the Israeli embassy inside the country. Said, no, this is the IRGC weapons trafficker that we know he is. This reminded me of how Christina Kirchner and some of her cronies, which many are in the government now, decided to lie about the Nisman murder and say it wasn't a murder, it was a suicide. They used that suicide hypothesis for almost up to 2 years after stalling the investigation, derailing the investigation, which is why to this day we still don't know who exactly killed Alberto Nisman. So I saw a pattern that was very similar in terms of disinformation and propaganda that happened immediately after this plane was landed. That's also happened after Alberto Nisman was killed. And it makes me just think that probably whoever's behind all this is tied to both incidents.
Back to your thought about this aircraft not being the only one practicing these transportation routes. Have we accidentally or on purpose stumbled into the way that Iran and its allies, Russia, others, have operated in Latin America for many years with this secret airline claiming cargo and moving people and technology around, perhaps even assassins around within Latin American borders? Is it possible that's what we're viewing, however dimly?
Absolutely, John. That's why I call this an opportunity, because had the Uruguayans not stopped this plane from leaving Buenos Aires, we would have not known about this. But now we do. And it's opening all kinds of questions from everywhere from Chile, whose legislature is looking at investigation because there have been planes of this nature that also arrived in Chile, to questions in Bolivia. Bolivia is a major destination of many of these airplanes. And as I mentioned before, John, we can track at least 6 Venezuelan airplanes that are managed by Iran. In some cases, they're leased to Venezuela from Iran, that are piloted by potential members of the IRGC or Iran's intelligence services. And they've been traveling to Mexico, to the Dominican Republic, to Nicaragua, Bolivia, Chile, Peru, Paraguay, and obviously Argentina, and over the airspace of many other countries that don't know what's on these planes. So this is actually a big question. And let me just make one last point, John, because I think this is leading to what's going to happen in August, which is for the first time, we're going to have the Special Operations Forces of Russia, China, and Iran participating in a military games inside Venezuela called the Sniper Frontier exercise, that is an attempt to normalize the IRGC, Quds Force, and other like-minded units from these countries in Latin America.
Joseph Umar, the Executive Director of Secure Free Society. It's a mystery. It will take a long time to unpack. If it was Hollywood, we'd say film noir, everybody dies. I'm John Batchelor.